I'm going to teach you my system for always building the best gun available, which has helped me make 1 billion rubles last wipe, and I'm well on my way to another billion this wipe. First, let's start with the basics of weapon modding. There are multiple ways you can modify guns in Tarkov. You can manually build guns by drag and dropping parts via the interface screen, which you can open by double clicking on the gun or right click and clicking inspect. You can drag parts just directly onto the gun or onto specific weapon parts, and you can link search a part to see what it can be connected to. You can hover over this part of the weapons part inspect menu and it will show you whether or not it is compatible. Note that if there is a red overlay of the gun, then it is currently not functional, so you can't use it. You'll need to put additional parts on it. And you can also modify parts in RAID, but not every part is modifiable. See this text here that shows you whether or not it can be modified in RAID. If you right click on the gun and click modding, then using this interface, it'll show you all the parts you have in stash that are compatible with your gun, and you can easily modify your gun. Then if you have workbench level 1 in hideout, you can use the edit preset function, and there are two ways to access this. You can either right click on the gun and click edit preset, or you can go down to the bottom and click presets and search up the gun that you want to make a preset for. This will show you all compatible parts, not just what is in your stash, and you can save presets if you want to build them later, and this interface will allow you to quickly buy all the parts that you don't have, as well as automatically assemble it for you. While you're building the gun, make sure to open the stats window here, and you can hover over the parts to see how these individual parts would affect the gun stats. You can also use loadout presets to save weapon presets. So if you don't have workbench level 1 and you can't access the edit preset interface, then you can manually build guns as explained earlier and then save it onto the preset like so. And then if you want to build the gun again, you can easily purchase the required parts and assemble it. For more loadout preset tips, see this guide here. To build the best gun available, we first need to understand the variables that make a gun good or bad. A massive variable is the available ammo for a given gun, as the ammo determines how much damage is applied to the target. So instead we need to think about gun and ammo combinations instead of just a gun build. The strength of a given gun and ammo combination can be split into 3 primary variables: the stats of the ammo, the stats of the gun, and the availability of both. So let's start with ammo. There are heaps of different stats for each bullet, which can be found in this spreadsheet BSG released. However, I only pay attention to a few of the stats, which I'm going to cover next. But if you do want to deep dive into the other stats, then I'll link the spreadsheet below. For CQC, which is the majority of my gameplay, I mostly just look at the damage, which is simply how much HP the ammo can remove from an unarmored target, the penetration, which determines how well the ammo will penetrate armor, and armor damage, which is how much damage the bullet inflicts on armor. If I'm shooting further than roughly 100 meters, then I'll also take into account the accuracy of a bullet, which combines with the accuracy of the gun to determine the overall accuracy of the shot, and the projectile speed, which combines with muzzle velocity to determine the speed of the bullet. If you're running shotguns or grenade launchers, then projectile count is important, as the damage stat listed is damage per projectile. To avoid having to worry about durability burn, I simply never start a raid with a gun that is under 95% or so durability, as it gives me a 2% buffer over the 93% mechanical malfunction threshold. And to avoid worrying about heat, I just don't spray multiple mags in a row. The next primary variable is the gun stats and components, starting with the weight. The lighter your gun is, the longer you can ADS, as well as the quicker you can ADS. Durability. The lower the durability of your gun means it'll be less accurate and more prone to malfunctions. Ergo, which affects the duration, speed, and volume of ADS, higher ergo being better. Accuracy, which affects the spread of the bullets, with a lower number being more accurate. Vertical recoil, the amount of vertical recoil that you'll feel when you're shooting a bullet, and it's a lot easier to control. And horizontal recoil, which is the amount of horizontal recoil felt when firing a bullet, which is a lot more random and harder to control. Muzzle velocity, the velocity the bullets travel, where higher number is better, as there'll be less bullet drop, and you'll have to lead your shots less. Types of fire, such as semi, burst, and full. Fire rate, which is how fast the gun fires, which also affects the recoil felt, as recoil is felt per bullet. Caliber, what types of bullets the gun can fire. And finally, available magazine sizes. Not a stat, but it's important to consider the size of available magazines, for reasons we'll get into more later. I don't worry about effective distance and sighting range stats on guns, as I haven't had an issue sniping as long as I run a high durability bolt action with at most 1 MOA, but sniping is a topic for another video. Lastly, we have the availability of the guns and bullets and any important parts. So, starting with the cost, some guns and bullets parts can be really expensive or really cheap. For example, the 7.62x5.1 MDR is $1,264 at the moment, versus the M9A3 is only $106. Pretty basic stuff. And then there are trader global and personal limits. So the global limit is the total number of units available for an item per restock of the trader, whereas the personal limit is the total number of units you can buy per restock if there is sufficient global stock remaining. Then there can be trader level requirements. For example, the RD704 is from mechanic level 4, so it takes quite a bit to unlock it, and some parts, guns and bullets are locked behind quests. So the RSS has a barter at level 3 Peacekeeper, but to actually buy it straight out for dollars you need Peacekeeper 4, and right now you have to complete Wet Job Part 5. Now I'm going to go over a couple of complete examples of gun and bullet combinations. For example, the PP19 with PST GCH. The bullets are low pen and not great damage either at 20 pen 54 damage, and the gun itself has okay fire rate at 700 RPM, has amazing recoil, feels like a laser at 42 vert base, really nice ergo, base 52.5, but the mags are a little bit small for an SMG. For a full auto gun, the mags are only 30 rounders. However, the availability is amazing for the PP19 PS2GCH. Very cheap, plentiful, only need low trader level requirements. The gun is 21.5k rubles from Prapor level 1, and the ammo is 71 rubles per round from Prapor level 2. In contrast, we have the 7.62x5.1 MDR with M80. The bullets have decent pen at 41 pen, decent damage at 80, and the gun has okay fire rate at 650 RPM. The recoil is a little bit on the higher end, base 84. The ergo is really good, base 75, but the mags are a little bit small for this gun, reaching a maximum of 25 rounds per mag. Finally, the availability of both is a little bit difficult. The bullets are a bit tricky to get. You need Peacekeeper 3 and to complete revision on Lighthouse, but they are decently priced at only $4 a round. Whereas the gun is a little bit more difficult to get, requiring Peacekeeper 4 and Wet Job Part 4, and the base gun is quite expensive at $1,264. Now that you have a rough idea of how to think about evaluating gun and ammo combinations, it's time to move on to another incredibly important aspect of gun building, which is how to adapt our playstyle for different combinations. A common trap new players fall into is that they try to make their gun able to do everything, but instead, it ends up being overpriced and unable to do any one thing well. So, how do we avoid this trap? It's crucial to remember that it's easier to change your playstyle to suit the strengths of your gun than it is to make one gun that is strong in every playstyle. So, how do we adapt our playstyle to the strengths and weaknesses of our gun build and ammo choice? Here are some examples of different gun and ammo strengths and weaknesses, and how we should adapt our playstyle accordingly. Starting off with the basics, if you have a high pen and low damage round, you should aim for the head and thorax, as your goal is to penetrate through armor rather than to leg matter them. And in contrast, if you have a high damage and low pen round, you should aim for the legs, because your goal is to avoid armor and kill them via the radiating damage after you've blacked the legs. Next, if you have an SMG and maybe a holo like a XPX3-0, then you'd want to aim for close ranges, so maybe you'd route around maps, trying to minimize the ranges that you're fighting at. So try to, say, follow dips in the terrain, or try to follow cover, avoiding any open areas, so that if you do run into someone, you're going to be at a nice range suitable for your SMG and holo, which is like loosely sub 20 meter engagements. However, if you have a bolt action with, say, a Schmidt and Bender, which is a 1x8x, then it would be better to have long open ranges where you won't die instantly if you miss one shot, because in CQC, if you miss one shot, virtually any other gun will have an advantage. So as you can see in this clip here, I have the high ground and I can easily retreat back up the road if I'm in trouble. Getting a little bit more complicated now, if you have a small mag, then you need to route a lot more carefully to always give you a way to safely retreat and reload without getting overwhelmed by a large squad. So more carefully sticking to cover, and if you see a squad, really trying to take one-on-one fights aiming to always retreat and reload, repack if you need after you kill one or even after you burn part of a magazine, because if you reload too close to an enemy, then they'll just push through your reload audio and kill you. Whereas if you have a big mag, you can be a little bit lazier with reloading and repacking, but you'll usually have lower ergo, so I would route for more CQC, and you can be more confident in pushing large squads as you'll have that nice big mag. But usually with a big mag, you'll have low ergo and you could mod for low recoil as well. So if you have like a really low ergo, low recoil build, say like a HK, then I would route for only CQC. And in order to account for the slower ADS, because I have low ergo, I would pre-ADS corners a lot sooner. So I would ADS and then peek rather than rely on quickly ADSing. And I would aim to point fire a lot more frequently with lower ergo. Because if I don't have the ADS, then it doesn't matter if I have low ergo. Now, what if you're running an unsuppressed gun? Well, if you're trying to be stealthy, then you'll need to move after shooting every time, as every time you shoot will give away your position. So you could consider adding a suppressor if you want to camp somewhere, like for doing shootable in heaven from Sniper Hill on woods. I would also avoid night raids or any dark areas of maps, as with full auto unsuppressed guns, it can be hard to track targets through muzzle flash if they are in a dark area. So it might be worth adding a suppressor just to remove that muzzle flash. And it's important to note that actually adding a flashlight can make it harder to see, as you can see here in this clip. Sometimes to get over the muzzle flash of a gun, such as with the M4, people will put optics on top of ring mounts, but this can lead to other issues like a large side of a bore distance, which means that if you're trying to head tap with the red dot, then you'll need to make sure to aim it just a little bit higher than you might be used to in order to get the headshot. Also, if you have a long barrel length, which is typical if you're trying to mod for minimum recoil, then you need to be much more careful about stuffing your own barrel as you're peeking through CQC especially. This list doesn't include all playstyle adaptations you should make, but it does give you a rough idea of the concept, so keep that in mind when you're choosing your gun and ammo. Now you know how to think about the strength of a given gun and ammo combination, and you know how to generally adapt your playstyle for some of the common weaknesses. But there are so many different things to do in Tarkov, how do we know what gun build is actually the best for our purpose? The key is to have a specific goal in mind that we'll use the gun to accomplish. The more detailed the parameters of the goal are, the better we can optimize the gun build for our specific goal. So let's go through some questions that you can use to identify the parameters of a given goal. For example, starting with the bullet, how much damage and pen do you need? So what do you need to kill? Do you need to kill scavs, rogues, raiders, cultists, boss, or guards? You can check the wiki to see health pools and expected armor to get an idea of how much pen you might need and how much damage you might need. For example, for raiders, you can see on the wiki that they have armor from tier 2 to tier 6. So it's probably a safe idea to plan for at least tier 4. And if you need to kill PMCs or if you're expecting to run through PMC hotspots, then you need to try to predict what level of PMC gear you're going to run into. However, PMC gear is difficult to predict, but generally gear is higher level the longer it's been since wipe, and the more valuable the loot is in the parts of the map that you're routing through. For example, if you were to focus on hitting Black Room on labs 5 months into the wipe, you'd hit much higher gear compared to woods cache running in the first week of the wipe. Then what ranges do you need to fight at? If you're fighting really close range, then MOA and bullet velocity doesn't really matter. But if you're fighting long ranges, then if you're using something with a high MOA, like say 5 or higher, then it'll start to matter more. And then really long ranges, then you'll be looking at, say, subsonic rounds will start to become important as they have low bullet velocity, and you'll want much lower MOA around 1 or less. And you'll need to start looking into damage drop-off over distance to have enough damage at the ranges that you're trying to be effective at. For the gun, what range do you need to fight at as well? So if I was CQC, then I'd prefer full auto, but there are some great semi-auto CQC options like the MP155 or Sega. How much does the rate of fire matter? Do you need higher RPM or can you get by with lower RPM? I prefer higher RPM, but if you have a higher pen and damage bullets, then that can make up for a slower RPM gun. Do you need a large magazine or can you get by with this nice small mag? I generally prefer larger mags to have less risk of being overwhelmed by large numbers of enemies, as we discussed earlier in Playstyle Adaptations. And lastly, I prefer a 1x or 2x optic or a variable scope that has a 1x option like a Voodoo or Razor or Tech 30 in CQC. Then if you're fighting long range and if you're planning on ADSing often and for long duration, then ergo and weight will become more important, should be higher priority to you. as well as if you're really getting into long ranges, then MOA and muzzle velocity. Lastly, are any other stats at all relevant for your particular goal? Just have a read through and try to think about if anything is going to actually help you with your specific goal. Finally, the availability. What ammo fits your requirements? What guns are available for that ammo? What trader levels do you have? How many of the gun and ammo can you buy per cycle from traders? Are there any crafting limitations? What is your budget? Do you have access to fleet? And lastly, are there any guns and ammo that you need to unlock quests for? Maybe you should go and do the quests first and then come back to building your gun and ammo combination for your goal. Now, I'm going to briefly discuss tactical devices. Firstly, I highly recommend you try out every tactical device and see what works for your goal. I'm going to go through some common goals and give a recommendation for each goal, but it's important to actually think for yourself, as how each tactical device works may change, or how much they cost, or what trader level they're locked behind. So pay attention to the goal I'm trying to solve more than the specific tactical device recommendation. It's also important to know that most tactical devices give a point fire accuracy buff, so I generally try to have a tactical device enabled at all times. So to start with, if I just want a bright laser, then the NC Star is super bright and it makes point firing a lot easier. Whereas if I just want to light up a room and quickly check for PMCs or loot, then I prefer the Clash 2U for its wide beam and decent penetration. But if you want to learn more about flashlights, then check out this excellent video by Gigabeef that I'll link in the description below. The Starter Deval is my favorite if I need to use multiple different settings in the same raid without having to resort to equipping an additional tactical device for the same gun. And the Maul is perfect for use with NVGs as it has a nice wide radius IR torch, making it easier to spot loot. If I need an active rangefinder on my gun, then at the moment there is only one option, and that is the Raptor. Finally, what I ran the most of right now is the WMX. Since there is a torch function, and if I don't have the torch enabled, I still want a point fire buff, but I don't like having a laser muddy up my reticle when ADSing, so I switched to the IR torch. Like tactical devices, you should try out every optic. However, what I mostly look for is stability, cleanliness, availability, and magnification options. Stability is how stable the optic is when firing or moving. Cleanliness is how clean the reticle is, and also how much of your screen the chassis of the optic takes up. Availability is referring to the same parameters discussed before regarding the availability of guns and ammo. And lastly, there are many magnification options, such as a 1x or 2x, or optics that have multiple options like a 1x and a 6x. So it's hard to tell what you actually need. So what I'd recommend is simply run through your route on your chosen map and take note of the ranges of sightlines. Like some routes will have really long ranges, like 50 meters, 100 meters, 100 plus. Some routes will be really close range, like sub 20 meters. And then try killing AI and offline at those ranges, and you will easily figure out what magnification options, what types of scopes are going to be best for those ranges. There are more advanced features of optics, such as the horizontal and vertical mil dots, but I prefer to take all my fights within 20 meters, so in this area I'm a little bit out of my depth. My current personal preference for CQC is the XPS 3-0 or Wilcox box, and for long range I prefer either the Spectre for budget or Voodoo if I don't care about the cost. I don't use thermals often, and the only one I find useful at the moment is the Fleur, which lets me easily spot enemies and zoom in to take a clean headshot. However, the refresh rate is quite low, so it's quite difficult to hit a moving target. Definitely try them all out and let me know in the comments if you find any of the others useful. You can also put some optics on a canted mount, which right now improves the ADS speed, but the optic is further away from your eye, which means that it is a little bit smaller and usually less stable. So I find canted optics a little bit more difficult to use compared to if they were just normally placed on the top. And you need to watch out for if you're using a large optic as your main optic, then when using the canted side, the large optic can block a lot of your vision. If you don't want to use any optics at all to perhaps make your gun build a little bit cheaper, then taking off the rear sight off of guns and keeping only the front sight has been quite popular for many wipes amongst budget gun runners. Finally, I'm going to show you some actual practical examples of how to build a gun and ammo combination for a few common goals. The most important thing to remember about this section is I'm showing you my process of gun building. Learn the process so that you can apply the process to your own goals at any time in the future, as these specific gun builds will quickly become outdated with upcoming patches, so focus on the process, not the specific gun build. And it's important to have realistic expectations for your gun and ammo combination, You can make the best budget gun for making money at level 1, but you need to keep in mind that you are still massively limited by your level, so even though it's the best for that level, it's still going to be absolutely garbage. And you should probably still avoid PvP or fighting any AI harder than a regular scav. So the process is, step 1, clearly identify the goal, as we discussed earlier in the video. Step 2, find the best bullet that suits your goal, which is also available by checking traders and flea market. Once you've chosen your bullet, then step 3 is to search through the guns for that caliber by, again, checking traders and flea market. Once you've decided on a gun, then step 4 is you start building your gun while keeping your budget and goal requirements in mind. To actually build the gun, I have 2 main approaches. My first approach is if I have a small budget, if I want to build a budget cheap gun, then I'll start with the base gun and then slowly upgrade until hitting the max amount that I want to spend on that gun. Or if I know that I want to have something that is fairly close to meta and pretty expensive, then I'll start by building the meta version of that gun and then look at the cost. If it's too costly, then I'll downgrade the most expensive parts. And for both approaches, before upgrading or downgrading to meet your budget, add any parts that you absolutely must have, such as say like a TAC 30 for the quest hunting trip. So for example, if I want a budget gun for CQC, say streets money running, then the PP19 is very cheap and I would minimally upgrade it, then test it out, and if I felt like it, I would upgrade it even more until I've hit my budget. But if I wanted a more expensive option for CQC, say like a 762x51 MDR for labs, then I would build something that looks fairly meta. And for full auto guns, my process for finding a close to meta build is generally to first mod for minimum recoil, and then decide if I want to sacrifice any of the recoil for extra ergo. And I'll keep retesting it until I found a recoil and ergonomics balance. Then once I've found that balance, I'll downgrade depending on my budget. Now if I want a budget gun for long range, then say the T5000 is a great example, say for doing Shooter 1 Heaven on Shoreline, grab the base gun and then minimally upgrade, prioritizing ergo and then recoil. For bolt actions, ergo is the most important thing, and then I would look at adding recoil or any of the other requirements that we've talked about before, like a suppressor, a tactical device, or even a larger scope. But if I had a massive budget and I wanted a more expensive long-range gun, then I could choose, say, an SR25 for rogue farming. What I would do is first find a close to meta build, modding for max ergo first, with as low weight as I can get. Then I would sacrifice ergo and wait for recoil until I found a recoil and ergo balance that I'm happy with. And the only way to do that is to go in and actually test it. Then once I found that balance, I would downgrade it depending on my budget. And step 5 is of course to try in offline and online raids, and you would keep cycling back to step 4 to keep tweaking your guns until you're really happy with the gun. And finally, step 6 is to record your raids, learn from each death, and modify your gun or playstyle as needed. If you're super new to Tarkov and building guns for yourself sounds very confusing, then you can try using this website to get you started. Adjust this slider until the trader levels here match your trader levels so that it only uses parts available at your trader levels. Then choose what you'd like to prioritize, for example, if it's suppressed or not, or if you focus on recoil or ergo. Then select your gun from the drop-down and click build, and it will give you a build with parts only from your traders. This build is a good place to start, but definitely try it out and tweak it as needed, especially as the build this website gives you does not include tactical devices or scopes. So the estimated price is going to be cheaper than your final build. And it may use quest locked parts, so if it uses one of those and you don't have access to it, then you'll either need to change out the part or complete the required quest.